The oppressive heat radiated from deep within his bones, a familiar agony that promised no relief. Leo's condition, a rare pheromonal anomaly, rendered him incapable of being permanently marked, a barren omega in a world defined by such bonds. For years, only the synthetic pheromones from his co-worker, Julian, had offered any comfort, a temporary dam against a relentless tide. That was before Julian's affluent family had intervened, viewing Leo as an anchor dragging their son down. Yet Julian had defied them, keeping Leo by his side. Leo had believed he could depend on that fragile arrangement forever, a steady foredrip of survival. Then a lovely, delicate omega named Chloe had appeared, Julian's fiancée, and Julian had experienced the intoxicating power of a true, temporary mark for the first time. His devotion had shifted in an instant. Julian had later marveled at the sensation, his voice full of a discovery Leo could never share. He had described the feeling of his pheromones locking into Chloe's body, a sense of absolute possession, as if she belonged only to him. Of course, Leo didn't understand. He just wanted to live. So when the sickness returned and Julian, bored and preoccupied, no longer answered his calls, Leo found himself outside the onyx room. He was a walking confection of distress, begging for the wolves to take a bite. He thought anyone might offer him a sliver of their alpha pheromones. That was when he collided with a tall stranger radiating an aura of cold night air, Julian's notoriously ill-tempered uncle. An overwhelming wave of enigma pheromones, sandalwood and winter rain, instantly saturated the air around him, targeting his aching glands. The man had promised him all the heat he could handle. His entire body was a furnace, his glands swelling with a pressure that felt explosive. Leaning against the cool brick of the building, Leo pushed open the heavy oak door of the lounge. This wasn't some dive bar. The air was clean, scented with expensive leather and quiet wealth. The patrons were almost exclusively alphas from the city's upper crust, men with enough self-control not to tear him apart on sight. A server intercepted him just inside the doorway, his expression a mixture of pity and professional duty. He explained that omegas in the throes of a heat cycle were not permitted inside. The potent spiced whiskey scent of Leo's distress pheromones was already coiling through the room, a siren call that turned heads and drew sharp, assessing glances. The ambient alpha pheromones in the air began to tangle with his own, a dangerous chemical conversation, but their ingrained discipline held them in check. Leo muttered the plea from between clenched teeth, a desperate whisper for any alpha to spare him some of their essence. The shame was a hot flush across his face, but the torment in his glands screamed louder than his pride. He needed pheromones to survive. But a long silence answered him. No one dared to approach. He sagged against the doorframe, and the server gently supported his arm, suggesting that the establishment had a hotel upstairs and that he could go purchase inhibitors for him. Leo shook his head weakly, explaining that they were useless. He had long ago built up an immunity. Still, no one moved. Defeated, he turned to leave, intending to find a less reputable establishment where desperation was the common currency. Suddenly, a sneering voice cut through the quiet hum of the lounge. It was a casual observation, wondering aloud how Julian's little omega had ended up in such a state. Another man chimed in, remarking that he'd been trailing Julian for years and questioning why Julian's omega was now broadcasting his heat to the entire city. Leo clenched his fists, his head bowed. He hadn't seen Julian in weeks. Normally, Julian's regular injections, though unable to form a true mark, were enough to keep him functional. But ever since Chloe had appeared, a whirlwind romance had consumed Julian entirely. Leo remembered Julian's recent cruelty, a boast disguised as a lament. He'd gloated about the euphoria of marking Chloe, then pitted Leo for being unable to experience it, for being unable to carry children, concluding that they could never truly be together. At the time, Leo had been speechless, the words caught in his throat. Julian's visits had dwindled, and when Leo's sickness had become unbearable, he had broken down and begged him for help. He'd found Julian drunk in a private suite, who had pointed at him and slurred to his laughing friends about how demanding he was, comparing him to a pet he had raised. The room had erupted in laughter. Leo had slipped away quietly, curling up in his room, enduring 3 days of escalating agony with no sign of relief. The pain had clarified his priorities. He needed pheromones. It didn't matter whose. He opened the door to leave the lounge, his vision tunneling, and immediately ran into someone entering. He stumbled backward, his body colliding with a firm chest that smelled of the crisp winter air. He mumbled an apology, rubbing his nose, not even looking up. The man bent slightly, his voice a low rumble as he steadied him, asking if he was all right. He then placed a hand gently on Leo's head, as if checking for injury, before expressing his relief. The man rambled on, saying that he'd knocked someone over just last week on the icy sidewalk and that Leo was so slight he was surprised he hadn't been sent flying. He added that it was dangerous for an Omega to be out alone during a heat cycle and offered to help him get somewhere safe. The words were a jumble in Leo's pain-addled mind, but a few phrases cut through the fog. Dangerous, heat cycle, help you. He latched onto the man's wrist like a drowning man grabbing a rope, pulling himself into the man's arms. He buried his face in the man's neck, inhaling deeply, standing on his toes to get closer to his glands, begging for help. He thought he heard a familiar voice, asking if he was Leo, Julian's Leo. The man identified himself as Caleb, Julian's uncle, questioning what he was doing and stating that he couldn't poach from his own nephew. Leo couldn't process the words. He'd never encountered an alpha who talked so much. He tilted his head up and silenced him with a kiss. The man's lips were cool, a stark contrast to the fire consuming him, but it soothed some of the frantic itching in his soul. The lounge grew louder around them. Leo clung to him, a dead weight Caleb couldn't shake. Then, driven by pure instinct, he bit down hard on the man's gland. He was confused when no pheromones flooded his senses. Had his own scent overwhelmed the man's? He didn't care. Perhaps he hadn't bitten hard enough. He couldn't miss this chance, the first alpha willing to get close. He clamped down harder. Caleb yelped, protesting that this was a first for him, being bitten by an Omega in public, and berated the onlookers for staring instead of getting a suppressor. Leo's teeth finally pierced the skin. A complex, woody aroma of sandalwood and rain filled his senses, a stark contrast to the bourbon scent he was used to from Julian. It was potent, grounding. The door to a hotel room slammed shut behind them. Caleb tossed him onto the bed, and Leo's head spun, but the sweet, earthy taste lingered in his mouth. It wasn't enough. He crawled across the mattress to try again, but Caleb was ready this time, catching him by the shoulders. Caleb demanded to know why Julian would let him wander out alone during a heat cycle, calling it a death wish. Leo mumbled that it didn't matter, that he and Julian were over. Caleb tilted his head, his expression skeptical. The pain was returning, and Leo tugged at Caleb's hand, pleading with him non-verbally to inject some pheromones. Caleb refused, insisting an inhibitor was on its way and that he would call Julian to pick him up. Leo explained his immunity to inhibitors was absolute, and as for Julian, he was likely preoccupied. Caleb, with some doubt, dialed his nephew's number. Julian's impatient voice came through the speaker, telling him to mind his own business and not to bother him. A distinct Omega's giggle could be heard in the background. Caleb's face reddened with fury. He ended the call with a clipped threat, his cheeks flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. He assured Leo he would deal with Julian later, incensed that his nephew would dare cheat when he already had him. Leo quietly clarified that the other Omega was Julian's fiancée. Caleb was floored, explaining he'd just returned to the country and didn't know. He muttered about what a scumbag his nephew was for agreeing to an engagement while still keeping Leo. Leo said nothing, feeling the small measure of relief he'd gained already being consumed by the returning fever. Caleb paced, wondering aloud what was taking his friend so long with the inhibitors. But Leo couldn't wait. Caleb was sitting with his back to him, the bite mark a stark blemish on his neck. He was a pillar of restraint, refusing to release a single drop of his pheromones no matter how much Leo's scent beckoned him. He even tried to distract him with meaningless chatter. While Caleb was looking away, Leo wrapped his arms around his waist from behind, pressing his face against his glands again. He begged him for help, his voice cracking, whispering that he was going to die and he didn't want to die yet. Tears soaked into the fabric of Caleb's shirt. His broad shoulders tensed. He swallowed hard, his whole body still. He asked again, his voice strained, if Leo was absolutely sure things were over with Julian. Leo nodded desperately, doing anything to sever that tie. Caleb sighed, a sound of resignation. He finally agreed to help just this once, but warned him that his pheromones were much stronger than a typical alpha's. As he carefully positioned his mouth over Leo's gland, there was an untimely knock at the door. Caleb's friend had arrived with the suppressors. Caleb started to get up, a lifeline of plausible deniability, but Leo clung to his neck, refusing to let him go, insisting again that inhibitors were useless. With no other choice, Caleb yelled through the door for his friend to leave, that they weren't needed. Leo had thought Caleb was exaggerating about the strength of his pheromones. How aggressive could a scent of sandalwood and rain be? But the moment they entered his glands, he nearly blacked out. A single, controlled release gave him more relief than 3 of Julian's full injections combined. How could any alpha possess such power? Caleb, his own brow slick with sweat, told him to say if it hurt, admitting it was his first time doing this. Leo just shook his head, his body trembling with relief, not pain. He asked for more. He couldn't guarantee he'd ever be this lucky again. The rich, earthy scent was so potent it completely eclipsed his own whiskey-scented pheromones. After what felt like an eternity, Caleb pulled back, breathing heavily. He informed him that a temporary mark was set and warned him not to wander the streets in a heat again. His cheeks were slightly flushed as he scratched the back of his head, awkwardly adding that if Leo felt unwell again, he could come find him. Leo opened his mouth, then touched the now calm skin over his gland. He was stunned. The pheromones felt locked inside, a true mark. But he had a pheromonal disorder. He couldn't be marked. Julian had tried countless times, once nearly depleting himself overnight in a futile attempt. Yet this man had done it with ease. He hadn't felt this complete, this sated in years. He fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When he opened his eyes again, the sound of a shower running came from the bathroom. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood. The room was tidy, and his own clothes were untouched. Caleb was a gentleman. This temporary mark should last him for a good while. But he was Julian's uncle. It was better to avoid him when he was thinking clearly. Leo pulled the $200 he had, all his cash, from his pocket and placed it on the neatly made bed before slipping out of the room. He took a taxi back to the old neighborhood, a gritty industrial district of brick factories and aging walk-ups. He stopped in front of the building where he and Julian had rented their first apartment. It held nearly all their history. His own mother, who'd had him young and always saw him as a burden, had dumped him in a place just like this when she learned of his condition. She had told him she had no money for his treatment and that it was alphas who made Omega sick, so he should go complain to them. He was 16, old enough to work, and he understood she was abandoning him. But staying with her meant starvation. Leaving meant a chance. As a young Omega in a chaotic factory district, he'd been thrown into a large dormitory with a dozen alphas by the foreman. The man, a cigarette dangling from his lips, had put a rough hand on his gland and told him not to be afraid, that the guys were all good people. When his subordinate questioned the legality of housing an Omega with alphas, the foreman had just laughed and declared that he was the law there. The room was full of restless young men, and Leo knew what was expected. He silently claimed an empty bunk in the corner. The foreman had promised him $2,000 a month for the easiest work, room and board included. Felt like a fortune. With alphas all around, he thought, surely one of them would help him when his sickness came. That night, the door was locked. The single bare bulb on the ceiling was blinding. He could hear an alpha swallow hard, then feel someone gently tugging at his shirt. A hesitant question. He stared at the light bulb, his voice flat. He said as long as they didn't kill him, it was fine. He closed his eyes, trying not to tremble as a hand grabbed his ankle. Suddenly, the light was blocked out. The person nearest to him was kicked away. A figure stood over him, silhouetted against the glaring light. The man pulled him up, shoving Leo behind him, his voice a low snarl. He told the others they must be tired of living, that if they wanted to go to jail, they should just try it. That was Julian. Leo shook the memory away, the key already in the lock of their old apartment. Back then, Julian had been a junior tough with a heart of gold. He had found Leo sick in that dorm a few days later, and when Leo begged him for pheromones, Julian had agreed. Their bond grew, and they moved into this apartment together, living there for nearly 3 years. When his family finally tracked him down and dragged him back into their world, the first thing Julian did was buy this apartment. He told Leo it held all their memories, that he couldn't bear to let it go. Leo had smiled, and they would come back every so often. But in the last few months, preoccupied with Chloe, Julian had forgotten all his promises. He opened the door. The cloying scent of caramel and wood smoke, Chloe's pheromones, mixed with Julian's familiar coffee and leather, assaulted him. The living room was a wreck. He carefully stepped around discarded clothing. The plant stand on the balcony was overturned, potting soil scattered across the floor. A small, hand-thrown clay pot lay on the ground by the entertainment center. He picked it up. It wasn't shattered, but a web of fine cracks covered its surface. He and Julian had made it together in a pottery class after work. Julian had said it looked like Leo. Leo had said it looked like Julian. Julian had laughed and declared it could be their unborn child. Leo clutched it and stood at the bedroom door. The scent was even stronger from within. He didn't have to guess. He hadn't expected them to come here to this place. He took a deep breath, knocked, and spoke calmly, saying he was just there to get something. A moment later, the door opened. Julian looked at him, his eyes heavy with sleep. He asked why Leo was there, annoyed, saying he'd told him to wait a couple of days at the villa. Leo's gaze flickered to the bed, where Chloe was still sleeping soundly. He said he would leave and come back later. As he turned, Julian grabbed his wrist, pulling him inside and gently closing the door. He led him to the sofa. He observed that Leo seemed better, questioning how he'd managed it without alpha pheromones. He wondered if Leo had been playing him all this time, clinging to him when he could heal himself. Leo just nodded mutely. Julian sneered, crossing his legs and gesturing at him with his chin. He had forgotten the nights he'd held Leo through the pain, his own tears of distress falling, letting Leo bite his arm until it bled to distract him from the agony. A faint scar had remained there for years, but it was now covered by a tattoo of Chloe's name. Leo lowered his voice and told Julian he wanted to leave. Julian waved a dismissive hand, telling him to go back to the villa before Chloe woke up and got upset. Leo clarified that he meant he wanted to leave him, for good. Julian looked at him with disdain, asking how a sick little Omega like him thought he could possibly survive without him. Leo looked back at him, seeing a stranger. The power and money had hollowed him out. Leo told him not to worry. Thanks to recent legal reforms, the social environment for Omegas had improved dramatically. The progression of his illness had also slowed. He had savings enough to last until he found a job. Julian tilted his head, studying him, realizing he was serious. He toyed with the engagement ring on his finger, seeming reluctant to let him go. Just then, the bedroom door opened. Chloe, wearing one of Julian's shirts, yawned and draped herself across Julian's lap, complaining that no one woke her up. Julian pulled her shirt down, covering a fresh hickey, and soothed her. She glared at Leo. Leo repeated his intention to leave. Julian weighed his options for a moment. Then Chloe spoke up, her voice deceptively sweet. She thought it was for the best, after all, since she and Julian were getting married, and questioned the point of keeping Leo around. With a clear answer, Leo stood. He placed the cracked clay pot on the coffee table. Chloe picked it up, curious. She remarked on how unique it looked, but in the next second, it crumbled in her hands. She yelped, claiming it broke the moment she touched it and almost cut her, angrily flicking the shards from her fingers. Julian fussed over her hands, ignoring the shattered memory on the floor. Leo walked out the door without a backward glance. He rented a small studio not far from the Onyx room. He'd seen a job posting that looked promising, and the interview went smoothly. He was hired as a trainee bartender. The Omega who had helped him that first night, Sam, greeted him warmly, handing him his uniform without a word about what had happened. He explained that bartending was easy and that the clientele were mostly wealthy kids just looking for a good time. Leo nodded, following his lead. As evening fell, the lounge began to fill. Leo mimicked Sam's professional smile, asking guests for their orders, but the room was nearly full and no one had asked him for a single drink. He cautiously asked Sam if he was doing something wrong. Sam frowned and looked pointedly at his glands. He admitted he was curious, but that it was Leo's private business. He explained that many people had seen him with Caleb, and that any alpha in the room could smell the lingering scent of an Enigma's mark. Leo sniffed his own wrist. He was wearing 3 gland patches, yet a faint scent of sandalwood still clung to him. Could they really smell it? Then why hadn't Julian smelled it yesterday? Even if he had, that wouldn't explain why everyone was avoiding him. The alphas here were high level. Or was Caleb some kind of pariah? Sam just scoffed and crossed his arms. He informed Leo that Caleb was an enigma, and he could count the number of E's in the entire city on one hand. He'd heard that most Omegas couldn't even withstand their mark and wondered aloud how Leo, having been marked by one, could still be working such a menial job. Leo frowned, wiping down the bar. He remembered how Caleb's pheromones had felt deeper, more concentrated, as if they'd reached the very core of his glands. Was it possible to be marked that deeply? Lost in thought, he didn't notice the slender hand tapping its knuckles on the bar until he looked up into Caleb's half-smiling face. Flustered, Leo knocked over a glass, hastily wiping up the spill while asking what he could get for him. Caleb just smirked and caught his wrist. He asked if he was the plague, wondering where the courage Leo had yesterday had gone. Leo stared, speechless. Caleb calmly pulled $200 bills from his pocket, the very ones Leo had left on his bed. He asked if Leo treated it like a business transaction, what giving him money was supposed to mean. Leo swallowed nervously and nodded, mumbling that Caleb had said he could come to him next time. Caleb's smile vanished. He couldn't believe Leo looked down on him that much, that he wasn't even worth as much as a common gigolo. He shoved the money back into Leo's hand, his eyes full of contempt. Leo didn't argue. He was Julian's uncle, after all. He had no intention of seeking him out the next time he got sick. He silently put the money away. Caleb stood there, staring at him for a long time before finally asking if Leo really didn't understand what he meant. Leo, thinking he was offended by the small amount, silently pulled out his bank card and offered it, saying there was $5,000 in it to repay him. Caleb's face fell. He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He called Leo cruel, then turned and stalked away to a nearby table where his friends tried to calm him down. For 3 days, Caleb came to the bar. He didn't order drinks. He just sat and stared at Leo, as if trying to burn a hole through him. Leo felt like he was being watched, as if Caleb was waiting for him to get sick and come begging. The truth was, the pheromones Caleb had locked in his body were already dissipating. A temporary alpha mark usually lasted 3 days, and enigmas should have lasted longer. He counted his money and fell into deep thought. He'd heard that the surgical procedure to correct pheromonal disorders had recently been perfected, with several successful cases. The cost was astronomical. He still had a long way to go, but if he worked hard for a few more years, he might save enough to be free forever. He glanced at Caleb's usual seat. He wasn't there today, which was a relief. While he was chipping ice balls, he felt a wave of dizziness. Sam noticed his discomfort and told him to go home. Leo insisted on finishing his task. The next second, a hand clamped down on his wrist. Julian stood there, his face a mask of fury, with a sullen Chloe trailing behind him. He demanded to know why Leo was working there, complaining that people in their circle were laughing at him. He added that he'd heard Leo had been marked, and he wanted to know how that was possible. He pulled Leo so hard he nearly fell across the bar, his stomach pressing against the tray of ice. Leo gasped, telling him he was sick and to let go. Sam tried to pull Julian off, but Julian was fixated on checking Leo's glands, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't understand why it mattered to Julian anymore. Julian went mad, declaring he would try again to see if he could mark him. He started to climb over the bar to drag Leo out. Sam shielded him, backing him toward the wine rack. Sam grabbed a bottle of red wine and waved it threateningly, but Julian was relentless. The next second, Julian had Leo in his arms. He hissed that he didn't believe it, that it couldn't be true. He roughly tore off Leo's gland patches, the adhesive stinging his skin. He began releasing his own pheromones, trying to force a reaction, to induce a heat right there in public. He'd forgotten how much more painful each force cycle was. He was like a feral animal, desperate to prove he was still potent. A voice like cracking ice cut through the chaos. Caleb had burst through the door, yelling Julian's name and calling him crazy. He strode forward and landed a solid punch on Julian's head. Julian groaned, stumbling back into the wine rack. Bottles shook and one fell, shattering against his head. Red wine and blood streamed down his face. Caleb shielded Leo with his own body. Straws of sandalwood pheromones washed over him, soothing his screaming glands, but the pain was still unbearable. Caleb spoke softly, telling him it was okay, that he would take him away, that he just needed to hold on. Leo bit his lip, grabbing Caleb's arm in a panic. He was sick again, he pleaded, begging for help. Caleb promised he would, that he was taking him to the hospital, that he had already made an appointment with a top specialist who could cure him. As Caleb lifted him, Julian, dazed on the floor, grabbed his trouser leg, asking where he was taking him. Caleb kicked his hand away and told his friends to handle Julian, remarking that his nephew also seemed to have a gland defect and was infertile, and that he had kindly booked a doctor's appointment for him too. In the car, Leo's body was on fire. He fought the urge to beg Caleb for his pheromones, but knew he would eventually break. He told Caleb he didn't have to do this. Caleb sealed his lips with an index finger and said quietly that he wanted to, that if Leo could just endure it until they saw the doctor, he would satisfy him afterward. Leo leaned against him, not understanding why Caleb was being so kind to him, but knowing he didn't deserve it. At the clinic, a blood sample was taken, and Caleb held him and comforted him for the 2 hours they had to wait for the results. An old doctor, Dr. Albright, sat before them. Leo recognized him as the world's foremost authority on glandular surgery and pheromonal disorders. He couldn't believe Caleb had managed to get an appointment with such a busy man. Dr. Albright explained that after reviewing the data, he'd found Leo's situation to be very unique. It was easily confused with a pheromonal disorder, but it wasn't one. His glands were simply situated deeper and were larger than average, requiring a far greater volume of pheromones to be sated. He then referenced information he'd received from Caleb about Leo's time with Julian. He stated that Julian presented with classic symptoms of glandular atrophy, low pheromone concentration, and low sperm quality. This was the reason Leo had never been marked all those years. Leo's head was spinning. All he heard was that he wasn't sick. Caleb held his hand, asking anxiously what they should do. The doctor slid another report across the desk, a small, knowing smile on his face. He explained that the pheromonal compatibility between Caleb and Leo was nearly 99%. A permanent mark from Caleb would allow Leo to live a completely normal life. Leo watched Caleb swallow nervously. An omega could only be permanently marked by one enigma in their entire life. No matter where he went, everyone would know he belonged to Caleb. But was Caleb willing? A man like him was supposed to marry a high-ranking omega to produce exceptional heirs. Leo had seen his own chart. His compatibility was a fluke. He was a C-level omega whose other values were completely unremarkable. Caleb turned to look at him, but Leo dropped his gaze. The doctor, sensing the delicate nature of the moment, excused himself. Leo held on to his last shred of reason and told Caleb he'd caused him too much trouble already and that he didn't have to do it. Caleb didn't reply. He gently lifted Leo's chin, forcing him to meet his eyes. He asked if Leo was willing. Once marked, it was for life. If Leo regretted it, it would cause him immense pain. His sincerity was disarming. The kinder he was, the less Leo felt he could accept. Caleb saw his hesitation. He sighed softly and pulled Leo into his arms, suggesting they start with another temporary mark to ease the pain. The next day, Leo woke feeling rested. The rich sandalwood pheromones in his glands were a comforting presence. Caleb had kept his word. It was only a temporary mark. He sat up, and a pair of strong hands steadied his back. He heard Caleb's voice, thick with sleep, expressing relief that he hadn't left. He was so decent, so good. Then Julian's cold voice cut through the quiet. Leo turned suddenly. Julian was standing in the doorway, wearing a hospital gown, a fresh needle mark on the back of his hand still bleeding. He'd clearly run out of his own ward. He asked what Julian was doing there. Leo instinctively moved to the far side of the bed, putting distance between them. Julian gave a bitter smile and sat down. He asked if Leo remembered the first time they met, how he had protected him, and how Leo had sworn to follow him for the rest of his life. Of course he remembered. There wasn't an Omega alive who wouldn't fall for a hero in their youth. He had truly believed Julian was his alpha for life. Julian lamented how beautiful it had been and wondered how he had managed to ruin it all. He said he regretted it, that he was sorry. He stood up, his eyes sincere, and held out his hands, asking for another chance. He claimed he was just blinded by ambition, that his feelings for Leo were too complicated to understand back then, but now he knew he loved him. Leo looked at him quietly. Though his mind had been clouded by pain yesterday, he knew what had happened. Julian was an alpha with atrophic glands. Chloe's grim face had said it all. She had abandoned him. Her own high-level status demanded a partner who wasn't defective. Leo looked at him coldly and asked if he couldn't smell it. Julian looked confused. Leo stood and calmly turned in a slow circle in front of him, asking if he couldn't smell the powerful enigma pheromones all over him. He pressed, asking if Julian's glands had atrophied to such an extent. Julian stood frozen, trying his best to detect the scent, but his compromised senses found nothing. He collapsed back into the chair, defeated. Atrophied glands could only perceive the faintest hint of an Omega's scent, much like a beta. He argued that he could still smell Leo's personal scent, that it was enough that they could be like they were before. He reasoned that Leo still needed pheromones, and he could provide them. He claimed they were the most suitable for each other. He moved closer, the arrogance of his youth gone, replaced by a raw, desperate need. Leo told him there was no chance. He pressed the nurse's call button. As the nurse arrived to escort Julian back to his room, he watched his former lover shouting frantically that he wasn't sick. Julian's gaze locked on Leo, his eyes filled with despair. He accused Leo of being cruel, of abandoning him now that he was sick after all the years he had taken care of him. Leo said nothing. He had, after all, been willing to give up everything just to live. Caleb returned the next day. Leo was in good condition, and the doctor cleared him for discharge. Caleb packed his things and took him back to his own spacious downtown apartment. He mentioned a highly rated restaurant nearby and suggested they go, then asked if Julian had hurt him, apologizing for coming back late. He spoke with the same casual kindness as when they first met, but Leo didn't know how to respond. They both tacitly avoided the subject of the permanent mark. Leo understood Caleb was worried about his feelings, and Caleb understood Leo was afraid, unwilling to mark someone he felt he didn't deserve.